You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, all eyes have been on this case happening between Judge Boasberg and the Trump administration, where Judge Boasberg put a temporary restraining order trying to block the Trump administration from sending accused gang members over to a prison in El Salvador. That issue has been appealed up to the appeals court, and we've been waiting for a ruling, which we just got. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals just sided with Judge Boasberg, and they affirmed, they supported the temporary restraining order that the judge put in place to stop the Trump administration from continuing to try to, snatch up and send to foreign lands people that they just summarily said were dangerous gang members with no showing, no real facts or evidence to support that conclusion, and most importantly, no constitutionally required opportunity to notice and to be heard by a court, by a judge, before they are deported. So a temporary restraining order was issued. Now it's in place for 15 days, so it's about to expire, and that adds a little bit of a procedural curveball to this, but we'll explain what happens moving forward in a few minutes. The appeals court judge, which consists of 3 appellate judges, one appointed by George H.W. Bush, one appointed by President Obama, and one appointed by Donald Trump, in a 2-1 split with the Bush and
Surprise.
Yes, the Bush and Obama judges, being loyal to the rule of law and faithful to the Constitution, said, no, Judge Boasberg got this right, and we affirm his temporary restraining order, and it will continue to remain in effect. The third judge, Judge Justin Walker, had a lengthy dissent that he issued. There were actually 3 separate opinions, and I will warn our viewers in the event they're going to pull it up online. It's 93 pages long. Full disclosure, I'm only about halfway through it because it came out just a little while ago. But here is, in essence, what the judges said. Donald Trump said, I'm going to deport these people under the Alien Enemies Act, which requires that the United States either be in a declared war, you're out on that score because we're not in a declared war with Venezuela or any other country, or if it's not a declared war, it has to be an invasion or a predatory incursion. And I'll tell you, if you want to read the first 30 or 40 pages of the opinion, they go through some great historical analysis of why having an immigration problem, even having dangerous gang members come from foreign lands, even if those dangerous gang members are involved in committing crimes in the United States, absolutely does not qualify as an invasion or a predatory incursion. Because what they do is they go through what the framers meant back in, first of all, 1798 is when the Alien Enemies Act was passed into law. And at the time, an invasion or a predatory incursion was universally regarded as essentially the enemy of a foreign nation or government entering our country for the purpose of conquest or plunder. That is the language in the opinion, and the judges pretty easily concluded that this is not a declared war. It's not an invasion or a predatory incursion. And the court said, and we do have jurisdiction to, one, both decide this temporary restraining order issue, and 2, look at the plain language of a statute like the Alien Enemies Act and decide if the government violated the statute or complied with the statute. And 2 of the 3 judges, even though this is just a preliminary ruling, concluded that it appears that they violated the statute, and it appears that the plaintiffs, that is the Venezuelan immigrants who were basically kidnapped, stuffed into planes, and sent to El Salvador, not even Venezuela, were denied their constitutional due process rights. So that is why, ultimately they said Judge Boasberg's restraining order will remain in place.
So Glenn, the restraining order will remain in place. It's valid for 15 days, so it's valid till roughly the end of this month of March. Does that mean as soon as the end of the month comes and goes, that the Trump administration is free to start deporting suspected Venezuelan gang members or anybody who they claim is a Venezuelan gang member once again?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know that's what the Trump people are hoping for, but I'm afraid they're out of luck for a couple of reasons. First of all, they can try to get this appealed up to the Supreme Court literally in the next few days. I don't even know they'll try because that's kind of a futile exercise, and it would only deal with this 15-day TRO, temporary restraining order, anyway. But here's the thing. The next step in this kind of litigation is Judge Boasberg will continue to hold hearings on two fronts. One, should the temporary restraining order be converted into a preliminary injunction? Those things are kind of kissing cousins to one another, but a preliminary injunction can stay in place much longer. Indeed, it can stay in place during the entire litigation of this lawsuit, which could take months. It could take a year or more, and it would be a more permanent freeze, so the administration would not be able to restart these deportations. So that's probably what will continue to happen in the litigation before Judge Boasberg. And of course, it's anybody's guess if the Trump administration will try to make a beeline for the Supreme Court in the next 24 or 48 hours just on that limited temporary restraining issue. But let me just point to one thing that I read that kind of, hit me right in the gut that I was reading in these opinions. And when I say opinions, all three judges wrote their own opinion, even though it was a 2-1 split. Two of the judges agreed in the result and one dissented. But here is something Judge Millett said that really you could tell troubled her about the fact that there were no hearings, there was no notice, there was no opportunity to be heard by these people that Donald Trump and his administration claimed were members of a dangerous Venezuelan gang. Here's what she said. Just give me a minute to get through this. So the plaintiffs, that is the Venezuelan immigrants, allege that the government, Trump's executive branch, has renditioned innocent foreign nationals in its pursuit against this violent Venezuelan gang. And the term renditioned basically means kidnapped and sent to foreign lands. For example, one of these Venezuelan immigrants alleged that he suffered brutal torture with electric shocks and suffocation for demonstrating against the Venezuelan regime when he was there, and he fled to the United States, Brian, to seek asylum against that violent, lawless Venezuelan government. And while awaiting adjudication of his asylum claim, he was expelled to El Salvador with no notice to counsel, no notice to his family, and get this, Brian, based on a misrepresentation of a soccer tattoo that apparently the Trump people confused for a gang tattoo. And to date, Brian, 15 days later, his family and counsel have lost all contact with him and have no information regarding his whereabouts or condition. And this is the last sentence and probably the worst part that makes me ashamed and embarrassed and furious at our government. The government, meaning Donald Trump's DOJ attorneys, concede that they lack a complete profile or even specific information about each individual that they grabbed, stuffed in a plane, and flew to El Salvador. They lack specific information about each individual that they targeted for this summary removal. That is flippin' shameful conduct by our government.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is the elimination of due process, courtesy of a political party that has beat its chest for God knows how many years about these stalwart defenders of the rule of law. And it goes to show they were never honest brokers about any of that. They never cared about the substance of what they were complaining about. This was all just to burnish their credentials, to offer themselves up as virtuous figures, and yet at the very moment they actually are able to back up what they've been saying for so long, they drop it like a bad habit. And this is what we're left with. Glenn, on the temporary restraining order versus preliminary injunction front, is because we had spoken about the fact that temporary restraining order is only a few days, and as we know, this one is expiring in just a couple of days here. The preliminary injunction can last much longer, can last the duration of the trial. Have the plaintiffs sought out a preliminary injunction, or might Judge Boasberg offer one up sua sponte, which is to say doesn't even need to be asked by the plaintiffs, just decides to do it unto himself?
Yeah, don't quote me on this, but I believe that the plaintiffs are also seeking a preliminary injunction so that they can freeze the status quo while this litigation continues. I would actually want to double check on the court filings to make sure that is the case, but I have a hard time believing they haven't done that.
And finally, let's finish off with this. This whole appeal was just regarding the temporary restraining order, but is it still Judge Boasberg who is actually litigating the merits of this case, litigating the actual case itself?
He's not only litigating the merits of the case, but he is in the process of demanding more information from the DOJ attorneys to assess whether the Trump administration intentionally violated his earlier orders. And if they did, then we're going to begin talking about contempt proceedings, what they look like, and what the possible sanctions could be if Judge Boasberg holds any of the Trump administration officials in contempt. So yes, he's basically doing two duties right now. He's litigating the case. He will decide, I'm quite sure, the preliminary injunction issue, and he has to figure out if the Trump administration intentionally violated his orders.
All right, and Glenn, I can't let you leave without asking you for your reaction to one more thing, and that is that in this new case that was just filed against these Trump administration officials, including Pete Hegseth, over what's being called Signalgate, this group chat fiasco where a bunch of top Trump administration officials, Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, had been discussing imminent war plans, and not only did so on an unsecured texting app, commercial texting app called Signal, but also invited a journalist to lurk on. All the while you have Hegseth himself claiming in the chat itself that we are currently clean on OPSEC, meaning operational security, not exactly clean on OPSEC if you have a journalist watching all of this unfold. But that notwithstanding, the judge who was assigned to this case was none other than Judge James Boasberg himself. So can I have your reaction to that?
Yeah, James Boasberg, Judge Boasberg, is up to the task. He will be juggling at least two, and I'm sure his caseload has lots of other cases in it, two really consequential civil suits that have everything to do with the competence of government and indeed the health of American democracy. He is up to the task. You know, I supervised Boasberg when he was a federal homicide prosecutor, tried murder cases with him. He has been handling the deportation litigation extraordinarily well and thoughtfully, professionally, and even civilly and cordially when he has DOJ lawyers who are not being particularly professional, civil, or cordial. And now he has this other big case where it sure looks like our national security was compromised by a bunch of knuckleheads in the Trump administration. And I did read through the complaint filed by American Oversight. That's a nonprofit that does remarkable work, sort of, holding the federal government to account when they violate the laws, as is alleged here, that they violated the laws in a couple of different ways, the Federal Records Act, the Administrative Procedures Act. And when you read through the pleading, it looks like a pretty compelling case because they are required by law to maintain these records and deliver them to the National Archives. And yet they are doing it on these encrypted chats and apps, which some of them are set to automatically delete within a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. Kind of runs directly contrary to the legal obligations our executive branch officials have to retain these things. And don't get me started on how they inadvertently invited a journalist to the war plans party, complete with emojis. I mean, all of this is just so much stranger than fiction.
Well, look, a lot brewing here on the surface as far as legal developments are concerned. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along with all the legal news as soon as it breaks, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. That's not just a great way to follow along with the news, it's also a great way to support our work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.